Welcome to the All Things Nintendo podcast. I'm Brian Shea from Game Informer, and this is a weekly podcast to discuss all the biggest news and games from the world of Nintendo. We are still kind of in a dead zone following the holidays, but we have a few topics to talk about. So we have a bit of news to cover, then we're going to get some impressions on another code, Recollection, and then we'll wrap up with eShop Gem of the Week and the return of Everybody Votes. Joining me for all that is Game Informer's Marcus Stewart. Marcus, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's been a while, I think.
It has been, yeah. Wes and Kyle have kind of been dominating the guest spot on All Things Nintendo lately, so I'm happy you're back, though. We've been kind of in this drought spot, where there hasn't been a whole lot of Pokemon news, but since you are on, that means one thing only. We have Pokemon news.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, I'm glad the tradition continues.
I mean, it only happens recently, anyway, when we have number one Pokemon fan Marcus Stewart on.
Yes.
What's the last Pokemon game you played? I think we've talked about this before, but what is the last time you played a Pokemon game?
Oh, man. Probably Pokemon Go when that first came out, and it was like the pop culture phenomenon.
So it's been a good 8 years since you've played a Pokemon game.
Yeah, and I guess if you want to talk like a proper entry, it was Platinum, which was the first game I had played since like the first generation. And Platinum was what, like 2010, 2009? I don't know.
I've got to get you back on the Pokemon train. You should check out, the one that I think is a good re-entry point is XY. But you have to have a 3DS in order to do that.
Yeah, I have what was it, Legends Arceus? I have that on my Switch wish list.
That's a good one. It's on your wish list. Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's almost there. That's like halfway there.
Yeah. all you need to do now is actually spend real money and fire it up and put the real time into it, and then you'll say, "Hey, I played Legends Arceus."
I mean, I do the foolish thing of I'll get this when it's on sale, knowing damn well the lowest it's ever going to be is maybe $45.
Yeah. A first party or Nintendo published title very rarely goes on sale, and if it does, it's like $10 off.
Yeah, they need to talk to Valve about how to do a discount.
Hey, they have good deals on non-Nintendo games, like on the Switch eShop. I've gotten the eShop gem that I'm talking about later on in the show. I think I got for $3, something like that.
Okay.
But circling back to this Pokemon news, thankfully for you anyway, it's not huge news, but we did get an epilogue chapter to Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, which I don't know how many people are going to actually experience this because, it has a lot of backlash. A lot of people fell off after beating the original game, and it makes it kind of hard to go back to. I experienced that myself where the expansions came out and I went to go try them out and I'm like, oh my God, it still haven't fixed the performance issues. And it made it really difficult to go from these even more smooth next-gen experiences that we get on PS5 and Xbox Series X, and going back to Scarlet and Violet and the really bad frame rate and performance that we got with those games. Going back to them now is even harder. So I don't know how many people actually are going to have the requirements to experience this epilogue chapter, because you have to basically beat all the content in the game, including the expansions, in order to access it.
Huh. Do you know if the epilogue comes with a performance patch? Is it the epilogue to the I was is it an epilogue for the technical issues too? Or?
At this point, I've got to hope against all hope that we get a third version of this game for Switch 2 whenever that comes out, and that's a launch title, and it's Scarlet and Violet, but it works.
See, that would be almost an indictment of is that them? They're saying the hardware was the problem, not the optimization in the game. It was the hardware.
I mean, I have a feeling it's a little bit of both, but yes, I think it's primarily the optimization, because then you look at something like Tears of the Kingdom and it runs pretty smooth most of the time.
Yeah.
But with this epilogue, the big news out of the epilogue anyway is that we get a new mythical Pokemon, and it is a ghost poison type named Pecharunt.
Wait, what?
Pecharunt. Okay. We'll go with Pecharunt. That feels better coming off the tongue. And it basically has this kind of shell exterior when it's kind of just chilling, and then I guess it looks like the shell opens up when it wants to battle, and then it can perform all sorts of different attacks. It actually has this really powerful ability. I was reading more about Pecharunt, and if it poisons an enemy with one of its attacks, the enemy also becomes confused.
Okay.
which that's very powerful because that's 2 status ailments at once. And if you played a Pokemon game, you know that confusion is one of the most annoying. I mean, I guess it's
I think
most RPGs.
it's the best status ailment that you can inflict. When it happens to you, it sucks.
Yes.
But like as a kid, when before you get the nuance of Pokemon in terms of like your moveset, you're like, oh, if it doesn't deal damage, I don't want it.
Yes.
But like confusion was like the one where it's like, oh, actually, that like screws up everything for them,
Yeah.
and they can hit themselves. So that was always like a instant yes, please, I'll take that.
Now, I actually don't remember because I know that it has an attack that inflicts bad poison or badly poisoned.
Oh,
And
okay.
I don't know if has to be badly poisoned or just regularly poisoned in
Wait,
order to.
is there degrees of poison in
There are 2
Pokemon?
degrees of poison in Pokemon.
Oh, okay. Was that always the case? Maybe I just don't remember.
I think it was introduced in Gen 2 or 3.
Okay, it was
I'm
like,
not
man, like this,
sure.
like, he is poisoned.
Yeah, and now it's
It's
like badly poisoned.
okay, they need to add a third one of like, I don't know, triple
Just
poison.
lethally poisoned. It kills you on the next turn.
Yeah, your Pokemon's like doubled over, just like looking at you over his shoulder, like, help me, please, antidote.
That would require them to add extra animations, which they
Oh yeah,
will not.
that's true. You got to wait for Switch 2 to get that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's also a release celebration that they are doing where if you don't want to buy all these expansions, you can get the Neo Kitakami case for your in-game Rotom phone using, and this is like a foreign language for you at this point, using the mystery gift functionality of Scarlet and Violet. So if you want to use that, the password is Neo Rotom Cover. If you go into the mystery gift functionality of the game, and that should give you a new phone case for your character. So
Oh, great.
that's fun.
I guess, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I was pretty disappointed that Scarlet and Violet never really got the performance patch that it really needed. Like I stand by the sentiment that like there's a really great game underneath all the nastiness of the performance of that game. But I will say, I will fully admit that I have kind of been itching to get back to play the expansions. Like I enjoyed that game a lot. It's just like it's so like jarring to go back to it. But is there any chance you will ever pick this game up, Marcus?
I mean, probably not as long as the performance issues are there, because it's like it already takes a lot for me to play a good one of these. So like to play the one that everyone says like runs like crap is like, well, why? Maybe I could either play one of the older ones or just wait for the next mainline one. But like, I mean, that's what makes the story frustrating, right? Like in a way, it would be an easier pill to swallow if Scarlet and Violet were bad games on top of being broken, because then you could be like, well, even if it worked, it's just not good, so I'm not going to play it. But like knowing like this is really cool, or I like this, but it's just like fighting me every step of the way, that's like infuriating, I would imagine, you know?
Yeah, it's so frustrating. And then like, a lot of people jumped on me for my score. I think I gave it an 8.25 out of 10.
Yeah.
Because they're like, oh, what you say, like it's broken and all this other stuff, but it's like, yeah, but there's a really good game underneath of it. Like it's so hard to assign a score to a game like that, where
I would
it's
say,
like,
what
it's
would you
such a good
score it
game.
if it worked fine?
I mean, it would probably be in the 9s if it worked well, and that was the same thing with Pokemon Legends Arceus. I think I gave that an 8.75, and it's like this game would easily be in the 9s if it didn't have the performance issues. I mean, the performance issues are nowhere near as bad on Arceus as they are in Scarlet and Violet, but like, yeah, I mean, it was probably at least a full point docked for those performance issues on Scarlet and Violet.
Okay.
Like that again, one of the best Pokemon games. It just runs like garbage.
Yeah, I mean, I know this isn't a Nintendo thing, but like as of the time that I guess people will be listening to this, Pal World just hit early access.
Yeah.
It's like the Pokemon with gun game. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but listening to Alex play it, who's like a huge Pokemon fan, he's talked about how one of the best things about it is like playing a open world Pokemon-esque game that looks and runs great. And it just makes you long for that even more, for like, why can't the mainline series just look and run this well?
It would be nice. I mean, that's my biggest hope, I think, as we I mean, presumably prepare to transition into this next generation of Nintendo consoles or Nintendo systems or platforms or whatever you want to call it, since it's a hybrid that we're presuming again. I hope that means that we're going to get the open world Pokemon. I hope that the combination of Game Freak having 2 mainline entries under their belt, making games for consoles, plus a more powerful system will give us what Scarlet and Violet should have been.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of even the hardware, it's like they can't do that. They can't do this again. Like they can't. This is technically the second time, counting Arceus, like you said. It's like they had to have regardless of the fact that these games print money, they have to know that whatever comes next, like it has to be on point.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if Nintendo even, because remember, like that was a rare thing where like Nintendo actually put out a tweet like apologizing for the state of the game when it launched,
Oh,
which they
right.
never do. I wonder if Nintendo sees that and is like kind of behind the scenes going to Game Freak and being like, "Hey, like I know you guys are a small team, like do you need some support from us? Like
It's like,
your partners?
what's up? Y'all good?
Like it's like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild were developed alongside Monolith. It's not like Nintendo never gets help from its support studios. So Game Freak has almost stubbornly remained this very small studio despite producing the main games of the highest grossing entertainment franchise on the planet. So I wonder if Nintendo is going to kind of intervene and be like, "Hey, like we want to help you and you're going to accept our help," even though they're not owned by Nintendo in any way. They're kind of a publishing partner and like have this we have this whole thing of like this weird relationship between all the stakeholders in the Pokemon franchise, between Game Freak, the Pokemon company, creatures, and Nintendo. And like somewhere on GameInformer.com explains it. It's a very complicated web, but like I would assume Nintendo has some say in like being like, "Hey, you're an exclusive game on our platform. We want it to run well." So I'm wondering if they would maybe kind of strong arm them into accepting a little bit of help to, at least on the optimization side.
I know Miyamoto has to poke his head in, but like, y'all making us look bad. What's going on over here? Like he's got to be like,
why does he sound like Mario from like the early '90s cartoon?
Okay, what the hell are y'all doing over here? We got this new Switch coming out. Why y'all making this? Games run better here? Why y'all making it look like it doesn't?
I think he went through like 3 different accents there.
Well, he has to start out by saying, "This is Miyamoto."
This is Miyamoto.
I got some things to say about the way you guys are making these Pokemon games lately.
It's weird how he started every single interview answer that I asked him with "This is Miyamoto."
Yeah, well, I mean, you got to let him know, right? Like that's just like his new you know how like when Dwayne Johnson, when he was The Rock, he refers to himself in the third person.
Yes,
I think he's in that phase of his career.
You smell what Miyamoto is developing.
Exactly. He's like, Miyamoto says that Mario movie 2 is going to make a $2 billion. I don't know.
That's
what happens when you make a lot of money.
What's Miyamoto saying about the Switch 2? Because that's what I want to know. And Marcus, wouldn't you know it? That's our next news story here. Last episode, I had Wes on and we did bold predictions for Nintendo's 2024. And my prediction was that the Nintendo Switch 2, or whatever it ends up being called, would come out in September of this year. And then we got maybe a leak, maybe not. Late last week, Game Shark. Did you ever have a Game Shark growing up?
I never had it, but I knew all about it just because I had friends that used it, but I myself never had it.
I had one for both Game Boy and Sega Genesis. And I remember that was my preferred way to play Sonic, was with a Game Shark with different codes and everything. So basically, for people who don't know what a Game Shark is, back in the days of cartridges, you would put the Game Shark cartridge into the system first, and then you would put the cartridge on top of that. And what that would do is it would enable you to, you may have heard that one of its competitors, Game Genie, which was kind of the more prominent version of it.
Right.
It would allow you to, before the game booted up, you would input codes that you would be able to find either in magazines back in the day, or once the internet became readily available, you could find them on the internet. These Game Shark codes that would allow you to do stuff like basically it was like mods for consoles. Like I had one for Sonic that was like, if Sonic gets hit by an enemy, the rings will scatter everywhere, but his ring counter won't get reset to 0. So if you have like 50 rings and you get hit, 50 rings will go flying, but you'll just be able to collect those and keep adding to your total. So you'll eventually just keep getting rings every time you get hit. Or like you can turn into Super Sonic without having any Chaos Emeralds. And like for Pokemon, for example, that was the one that I had so much fun like modding Pokemon using Game Shark on my Game Boy. And I would make it so that like any wild Pokemon that you encounter, you could set it to whatever you want. So I would have it so like, oh, like when you go to like in Red and Blue, you go to the area where it's like Caterpies and Pidgeys. It would just be like, here's Mew. That was, that was the only way you could get Mew back then, because they never actually officially released him in Pokemon Red and Blue, aside from that contest. I think was only in Japan.
Right.
But anyway, so that was what a Game Shark used to be. Obviously, cheat codes are not really a thing that much anymore, and all the stuff that Game Shark probably once did is now kind of behind microtransactions at this point. And or just outright outlawed by like the end user agreement that developers make you sign and scroll to the bottom of at the start of every video game now.
Yeah.
So they're adapting to what they are now. Now it's an AI product, which what isn't at this point, and it's going to be aimed at giving players hints and assistance while they play. So I guess like if you're playing, it'll say, "Hey, you could do this better," which that sounds like a reasonable pivot and a reasonable application of AI. But we're getting to the reason that we're talking about Game Shark here is that late last week, in a press release, they sent out like this product is planned to launch. It says, quote, "The official launch is planned to coincide with the Nintendo Switch 2 in September 2024. So that raised some eyebrows, as you might imagine. And it's
It's kind of them living up to their name. Like they used to be the cheat code for games. Now they're the cheat code for console release dates. It's just like it's like, we found out the date before everyone else because I use Game Shark.
My joke was AI continues to ruin everything. So I don't know. This sounds like it could be substantial news, but they also may just be guessing, right? Like they might just be saying like, oh, we think that it's going to launch around this time. And they might just be going off the same information I was when I made my prediction last episode. But like, what do you think they were going off of with this?
I mean, I don't think it's like a stretch to say that I fully expect a Switch successor by the time this year ends. Whether announced or released, maybe both. So I could see like I that doesn't sound unreasonable. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it's like, okay, like holiday, early fall, so you got time to get it, and then it's available for Christmas and all that stuff. So like I could see that being the case. It's weird that they worded it like that if it's supposed to be a guess, because the way it was phrased kind of sounded like, oh no, we know it's September, not like, I don't know, we expect September, it's just like, nope, September. So that's interesting if that wasn't the intent. But yeah, like I said, like when I saw that report, I was like, okay, this might not be 100% true, but there must be something to it, because at this point, there's almost no way there's not a Switch 2 announcement this year, at the very least, right?
Yeah, I mean that Wes and I talked a little bit about like, do you think that this is the year that we get the Switch 2, or is it just the year we get the announcement of the Switch 2? And I think we both landed on the side of the fence that this is the year that we get the Switch 2. Like we both, he predicted November, I predicted September. So we'll see where we actually end up. But like we both were like, yeah, 2024 is the year we get a new Switch console or a new Nintendo console.
I mean, the last few consoles, correct me if I'm wrong, but like from announcement to launch, they've all been like less than a year, right? Like they usually don't announce a console that far out before it releases. Like it's like 6 months tops, right? Because like the Switch, when that was announced versus like launched, that wasn't like a full year, wasn't it?
Well,
was it only just a few months between?
I'm looking at Wii U right now. Well, the Switch was only a few months for sure. I'm just trying to see like what the Wii U's announcement was. It was so E3 2011, and then it came out November 2012. So yeah, it's been so
that one's a little longer.
The Wii U had about a year and a half.
Okay. I wonder, maybe this will be shorter just for if it is just sort of like a souped up version of the Switch. Obviously I don't know anything about hardware and what it takes to put it together, but on paper, okay, maybe that's like, because it's not a completely different thing. Again, this is going conjecture, that they can do a shorter like marketing ramp up of like, hey, that thing that you like that makes us a ton of money? We made the better version of that is like actually a successor. It's coming out in a few months. Surprise. Uh, like it feels doable for them, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I've said my predictions on this show pretty frequently here, but I would not expect them to go too far from the success that the Switch brought them, just because we saw what happened when they were like, okay, well, we just need to innovate and make something completely different. Let's do the Wii U. And I do think that like the messaging will be key, and also the kind of the naming convention will be key, because like the Wii U was so confusing because the system itself looked like a Wii kind of, and it was called the Wii U. So even Jimmy Fallon, when they like did a big segment with him prior to launch, he was like, "Hey, we're gonna talk about the Wii U. It's this new controller for the Wii. It has like a screen on it and everything." And then like Reggie came up to him after and like in the commercial break and corrected him.
Yeah, he threatened him.
He's like, "Say that one more time, I'm gonna throw you through that wall." But yeah, that's enough of the Switch 2 predictions here. Let's move on to what we have now, Marcus. We have 2 new games on Nintendo Switch Online's Game Boy Advance library.
Woo!
Golden Sun and Golden Sun: The Lost Age are available now, and I'm going to be real with you. I've never played these games, but I know they have so much love within the community. Have you played either of these?
Nope. Never
All
have,
right.
but I've always been curious about them as a RPG fan, and so this news is good for me too.
Yeah, so I mean, they're bona fide classics, as I said. Like Golden Sun has a 91 on Metacritic, and The Lost Age has an 86 on Metacritic, and a lot of people consider them some of the best RPGs of all time. And it's nice to finally have them available on the Switch. As we talk about the Switch's what we assume is the final year of this console.
Yeah, and then we have to buy it again on the Switch too.
I hope not. I swear to God, if they start over all the libraries, like, hey, we're bringing Nintendo Switch Online forward, and we're back, and guess what? Super Mario Brothers and Super Mario Brothers 3 are the launch titles. It's like, oh my God.
Okay, wiping that slate clean.
We'll see the Nintendo 64 library added in 2027. But anyway, both of those are available now on Nintendo Switch Online, plus expansion packs Game Boy Advance library. And then here's a pretty unexpected announcement. Ace Combat 7, Skies Unknown, is coming to Switch, which, where did this come from? This came out on other platforms in 2019, and it's just like basically like a fighter jet game. And
I mean, I guess because those games are pretty like high fidelity, like pretty graphics driven games. Maybe it just took that long to get that to fit on a Switch in a way that doesn't totally compromise the experience. Is this a cart game or is this like a cloud game?
I think it's like a local game. I didn't see anything that said it was a cloud game.
Okay. I mean, maybe
the funny thing is that like they use like, I remember watching, because Andrew Reiner, our former editor-in-chief, reviewed it. I remember going into his office and he was reviewing it, and there was a cutscene playing, and it was like people talking, and they were obviously computer animated people, but then there was a dog sitting like on the runway with the people, and the dog was very obviously a photo of a real dog. And it was like, what are we doing here?
Like it was a still image, like it wasn't moving or anything?
Yeah, it was just a still image of a real dog.
Oh, that's great.
And it was such a strange thing. I need to find that at some point.
See, that's what took so long. They were like, how do we get this still image to look as good on the Switch?
They don't have the fidelity to make that real dog look real. But this version gives you all the DLC, all the added content, and a music player mode and special cosmetics that they say celebrate the series past. I don't have any history with the Ace Combat series, but Ace Combat.
I used to play the demos on PlayStation. That's the most I ever played, like in those PlayStation Underground discs for like the first or second Ace Combat game.
Oh man, the PlayStation Underground discs.
I would always stall the plane out because I would try to do the thing like, oh, how high can I fly? And then the plane would be like, start nosediving. They're like, pull up. What are you doing?
Those are always the funnest things to do with those games, right? It's just like, let's see how we can break this $1 billion fighter jet that it doesn't really have any
Yeah, you're
financial
like, I bet I could go into space with this.
Imagine if you actually broke through and got out into space, and then there was like a whole space thing that nobody else knew about that was programmed into the game.
Oh, I tried so hard. For some reason, my little kid brain was convinced, though. Like, I bet this thing could go into orbit. I just have to try harder. That's all.
You almost unlocked Starfield before Starfield existed.
Yeah, it had better no load screens back then. It was you just go as high as you wanted. It was great.
But anyway, Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown Deluxe Edition comes to Switch on July 11th. And then the final news piece that we're going to talk about today, we learned more about Lunar Lander Beyond, which is a reimagining of the classic Atari game from the developer that made Cris Tales, which I did not think that would be the developer that would take on the Lunar Lander franchise.
Yeah, right? Like, is it a franchise? I've only ever heard of, like, the just Lunar Lander. Were there sequels?
There were, like, spiritual successors, so I guess maybe not a franchise, but now it's a franchise.
Oh, well, there we go.
So it's like a reimagining, and it's like, like, I think they said like there are like 30 levels, and you can explore around different like celestial bodies, and like you're basically just piloting a craft through these areas. I don't know how exactly the combat and everything works, but we got a cinematic trailer showcasing the art style that we saw in Cris Tales, and then a bit more gameplay. And I will say that the game is looking pretty cool. Especially when you take into consideration the starting point they had with the super simple concept of the original Lunar Lander, which was literally land on the moon over and over again, and just land on different like varying terrain and everything.
Hey, do you think they put this out now because we're going back to the moon with that like the mission now where we're sending the probe of whatever up to the moon?
No, I don't think they did that.
Okay. Do you think that's why that's happening? They talked to NASA or SpaceX, whoever's doing it. They're like, hey, we got this. We got a way we can promote this if you guys want. You guys heard of Lunar Lander?
That was just, synergy, right? Corporations are all about synergies. And yes. I'm sure that's what they actually were. And when they were talking about like, hey, I bet if we get this game out by the time they get to the moon, that'll be great viral marketing for this game.
Yeah.
But I did an email Q&A with the director and producer of the game, and they talked a lot about expanding the Lunar Lander universe through this game. And you can head to GameInformer.com to read more about that.
The Lunar Lander universe.
Yeah, there's a lot of like interesting stuff that they're doing where like you can have different pilots that join your team, almost like XCOM style, where like different pilots join your team and they have different skills, and like they have like a stress meter that like causes like stuff to happen if your stress meter gets too high, like almost like a breakdown almost. And like the tension of like different things happening will affect your pilots, and like different pilots handle things better based on their different stats. They're doing some interesting stuff with this game, and it's definitely expanding beyond like that very simplistic original concept.
I hope the Lunar Lander universe is just the rest of the solar system.
It seems like it might.
It's just like, hey, we could land this thing on other planets. The sequel could be Mars, or, Neptune. Who knows?
Yeah, Neptune or Lander.
Ooh, there you go.
Anything? Is that something?
Yeah, I think Neptune not as blue as we thought it was, by the way. Saw like a report saying that how the pictures of Neptune are like super blue.
Yeah.
Those are fake, and those have always been fake. Like those were just enhanced to show the details of the atmosphere and that, because they released the first true image of Neptune, and it's disappointing because it's like the same kind of dull green that Uranus is, so they almost look indistinguishable.
I believe it's pronounced Uranus to avoid confusion.
Right. Yes, that's the Greek name. Yeah.
Yes.
Or the Roman name, I should say.
And nobody tell Eiffel 65 that it's not quite as blue as we thought it was.
Yeah. Oh, they're in a fit right now.
They write their hit song.
Yeah.
But that game, Lunar Lander, is scheduled to release sometime in the first half of 2024, and I know I'm going to check it out, so I'll probably talk about it on this podcast.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how it is.
Yeah, Atari's been doing some good stuff with like the Atari 50 collection. I was not a big fan of the Berserk Recharged, I think it was called. I think it just wasn't what I was hoping for with the reimagining of that franchise. But there's some good stuff that they're doing with this, and like the acquisitions they've been making and everything. So
yeah, Hotel's coming back.
The Hotel, yeah. I'm looking forward to staying in the Atari Hotel in Las Vegas, probably in like 2027 or 2028, whenever that finally opens.
Yeah, hopefully that lasts longer than the Star Wars hotel did.
Oh man, that was what a disaster that ended up being.
I wish
But
I got to go to that.
you
Or
did?
in Orlando with me. So
You said you did get to go?
no, I said I wish I did
Oh,
since I was so close to it.
yeah.
But money.
Yeah, from what I hear, it was very expensive, and you did not get much for the experience.
Yeah, Atari should do the same thing where it's like it's a role play of 70s Atari while you're there. So like you just go to hot tub meetings and just get and do a lot of drugs.
And Nolan Bushnell is there for some reason.
Yeah, like they have a Nolan Bushnell actor.
He's just hanging out with you. All right. Well, on that note, Marcus, we're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we will be learning all about the first Nintendo published title of 2024, Another Code Recollection. We will be right back. As we covered a couple of weeks ago, Nintendo has a decent first quarter ahead of it, and this week sees its first release as a publisher of 2024. It's not Mario, it's not Zelda, it is a collection of games from a series called Another Code that originally started on Nintendo DS. Another Code Recollection gathers Another Code 2 Memories and Another Code R Journey into Lost Memories. 2 Memories was known as Trace Memory in the US, and then it released for the DS in 2005, while Journey into Lost Memories came out only in Europe and Japan in 2009. So Marcus, with all that out of the way, you've had a chance to spend some time with these games. Give me a little background for, I would say, probably the majority of the listeners here as to what this series even is. And, because when they announced it on Nintendo Direct last year, I was like, I've never heard of these games in my life.
I had the exact same reaction. I'm like, what are these remakes of? What? Okay. Funny enough, as I was looking up stuff about the games, former editor Kim Wallace actually has a article from 2012 of like 10 of the 10 best like under the radar graphic novel adventures, and Trace Memory is on it. So apparently she was a fan. But yeah, like the series, or at least that first game that only came to the US or did come to the US, has a bit of a cult following, which I guess would explain this remake. I like you mentioned before, it's like Another Code Recollection pretty much takes both of those games and remakes them pretty much from the ground up. Like I'm pretty deep into the first game, and I've been watching footage of Trace Memory as I've been playing, kind of to see the differences, and it's pretty night and day. Like they put a lot of work into this. So the general story premise of at least the first game, because the thing about Recollection is that unfortunately you can't choose which game you want to play. You have to play the first game, Another Code 2 Memories, to get to the second game.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, which can be annoying. Like the Advance Wars reboot did the same thing. Like you couldn't play Advance Wars 2 until you beat Advance Wars 1. Though at least this might be a little better one, because when I looked up on how long to beat to see how long both of the original games were, apparently Trace Memory was like 5-ish hours, and the sequel is like 15 plus hours. So if that's still the case here, then like probably 3/4 of Recollection is the second game. So at least it won't take you too long to get to it if you want to play that one. But they also changed a lot of the first game, where even if you still have some pretty vivid memories of playing it, you're gonna be in for like a different experience when it comes to puzzle solving. So I can only talk about the first game because I just haven't hit Another Code 2 yet. But the story premise is that you play as this 13-year-old girl named Ashley, who is traveling to this mysterious island with her adoptive aunt, because she finds out that her dad, who she thought was dead her entire life, is actually alive and well on this island. And out of nowhere, he reaches out to them and says like, hey, come see me. And it also turned out that the aunt knew that he was alive this whole time, but for whatever reason, the dad told her to tell his daughter that he's dead. So that mystery set up. You're like, okay, what's going on in this island? Why did my dad basically lie to me his whole life? Also, your mom is dead, and there's some stuff with that of like, how does she die? And so you get to this island, and then almost immediately Jessica goes missing, your aunt, So now you're trying to find your aunt and where your dad is, and it takes you to this mansion where the bulk of the game takes place. But right before you get there, you meet a ghost named D, who's this child. He's pretty much the same age as you, who passed away 60 years ago in like the 1940s, and he has no memory of how he died or what his life was like. He just kind of knows that he lived in that house, and he needs your help trying to piece together his memories. So the two kind of form a bit of a kinship because they're ultimately both trying to find out the truth about their past and their parents. And the game, at least in the original Trace Memory, it was a top-down game. Since it was on the original DS, like the top screen was kind of where cutscenes and like your map and information was, whereas at the bottom screen, it was like a top-down, like it was just like a top-down perspective where you just steered Ashley around. In Recollection, it's a traditional, like behind-the-back, third-person, fully explorable 3D environments. It's got full voice acting, which the first game did not have, and it's like puzzle solving with like graphic novel. I will say the graphic novel side of it's not as dense with text as a lot of graphic novels can be. Like whenever I think of like graphic novels that are basically books, I think of games like 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, which is a great game, but it's a lot of reading.
Visual novels, right?
Say again?
Visual novels or graphic novels?
Oh, well, I guess like visual novels. Yeah. Whereas this one, like the text isn't nearly as much. Like, and it also helps that they have some quality of life improvements of like you can hit autoplay on the text. You don't have to skip through it with a button. You can just sit back and watch it like a movie until it's time to play again, which is nice. And like I said, the bulk of the game takes place in the mansion. You're going room to room, solving puzzles and finding keys. Very much like for lack of a better term, I guess like Resident Evil style. Like you'll be like, oh, okay, this key, I need a specific shaped key to get into this weird room that's got this symbol, so I need to keep an eye out for that.
And Mr. X is constantly on your tail.
Exactly. Which would, maybe he is. This is not a scary game for those wondering. Like, it is not a horror game, but like, I guess the spookiest thing is your ghost friend, but he's like a friendly ghost. The sort of your main tool for puzzle solving is this device that is called the DAS, though in the original it's interesting and kind of funny where in Trace Memory, the 2005 game, the device looked like a DS. Like it just straight up looked like the original version of the DS that you just used to take pictures and keep pretty much notes of everything you did. And now in the remake, it looks like a fake Switch. And it threw me for a loop because I started playing this before I started looking up footage of the first game. So when I saw that, I was like, wait, there's no way this looked like a Switch back in 2005, did it? I was like, was this weird? Was this game like weirdly prophetic?
Well, I mean, that's kind of like how with Breath of the Wild, the pad looked like a Wii U gamepad,
right?
And then in Tears of the Kingdom, it suddenly looked like a Switch.
Yeah,
like, they updated the technology to reflect the tech of the time.
Yeah, so that's like a funny little touch. And I've only heard this from Kyle because I was talking to Kyle about this game, and he told me that his wife is a big fan of Trace Memory, and he mentioned that the original version of the game had was one of the games that used the DS in unique ways for puzzle solving. Like you said, I think that was the first game that required you to close the system to solve a puzzle. Like I think even pre-Phantom Hourglass.
Oh, weird.
And so like obviously a lot of those puzzles have been reworked for the Switch release, because even in the beginning, as I'm watching the YouTube walkthroughs of the first game, there's like whole puzzles that have been removed and replaced with something completely different. Like the original, like the first puzzle in the original is like this drawbridge that you have to drop. Mm-hmm. That's completely gone, and now you have to just kind of open this gate, and it's just a completely different sequence that you need to do to get through it. And there's other examples like that early on. I don't know how much of that holds true for the rest of the experience, but I've been surprised about like, oh, okay, they just took a bunch of stuff out and just replaced it. It's not like they just modernized it. And I'm wondering if that's just like a consequence of like, okay, this puzzle in this original incarnation fit the DS sort of like hardware and just style better than it would on a single screen, so we're just going to completely change it. But even then, the game still has like you still have a cursor that you're moving around like in place of a stylus. You're going up, you're like inspecting rooms for like hidden either clues or objects and adding them to an inventory. You're inspecting clues, you're combining objects together, and you're finding, sometimes you'll find an object or just something in the room that will trigger a dormant memory for D, where he'll remember something about his life. And then that propels the story on top of like Ashley's own story. But I would say like it's impressive the amount of work that they put into it. Like again, if you look up comparison videos, you're like, okay, yeah, they completely overhauled this, and for the better, I think.
So it's
And
more
I will
like a
say,
remake than a remaster.
yeah, this is definitely a remake. And I'm enjoying it so far. I'm pretty deep into the first game now. I must be approaching the end just because of how long it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But like I'm digging the story so far. There's been some twists and turns that I wasn't expecting. I think the puzzle solving is pretty confident or competent, I should say, and clever at points. There's a little bit of like the old school adventure game nuisances. Like there's some like some elements can be easy to miss if you don't have the camera positioned the right way, where an object that doesn't look like it's interactable becomes interactable. And you're like, oh, okay, I didn't think I could grab that, but I guess because I was a few degrees off on my rotation, it didn't highlight it, or it just didn't react to me.
Yeah.
So there's been a few times I've had to like retrace my steps to a room where it's like, okay, it's saying there's something in here I need, but I could have sworn I've touched everything that I can touch. And you're like, oh, this little thing in a corner, I can touch that. Okay, I thought I looked right at it, but it didn't do anything. There aren't a ton of those moments, but they do rear their heads every now and then. And there's also the default camera movement is incredibly sluggish, to the point where I highly recommend, if you're playing this game, to go into the options and raise the sensitivity.
Okay, good. So there is the option.
Yeah, because I think it defaults at like 20 out of 100, and I had to jack up this is like purely the camera movement. I had to jack that thing up to 50 to get it to where I like to be. And I am assuming that's more of a holdover of like the stiffer style of exploration that it was on the DS, or maybe they just really don't want you to miss things as you're looking around, so they made you turn like a tank. But yeah, I go into the options and change that if you don't want to give yourself a headache. But this game has kind of become my before bed kind of cozy. Like, oh, I'm gonna play like an hour or so, run around, watch some cutscenes, find some stuff. Like, it is an enjoyable like graphic puzzle solving adventure, and I'm gonna see it through to the end because like the story's deep enough where it's like, okay, I want to see where this goes. I like where it's going. I like the characters mostly, and I'm also curious to see if it just seamlessly jumps into the second game, or if there's like a hard cut of like, okay, you beat this one. Do you want to play the sequel? Because the only thing I know about the sequel is that it's set a couple of years later. So there's going to be a time gap regardless. But I didn't know, and I couldn't find anything online of like, did they just make it so you have to play the first game before you can get to the second game? Or did they straight up combine the two into a single, like, seamless experience? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I actually love that approach, by the way, of like taking the older games and combining them into one seamless experience. Like, I think that is something that actually like blew my mind. That's what initially like made me so all about like Sonic 3 and Knuckles, for example. Because I was like, okay, I played Sonic 3, I played Sonic and Knuckles. What if we just combined them into one experience that like went from one end of it all the way to the other end of it? And I do like that approach even today. But the thing that kind of I'm most curious about is the types of puzzles that we can expect from this game, because you talked about how they removed some of them, but like what type of puzzles are in there? Because like I think in the trailer they showed like dropping like pieces of a bridge in place in order to like cross a river or something like that. But like, how complex do these puzzles get?
Yeah, I mean, like the puzzle you mentioned is literally the first thing you do in the game. Like, it's the most basic thing of like, there's a
Yeah.
hole in the ground. Oh, there's a board over here. I'll pick it up and cover the hole with this. There's like, so the camera that you have in your fake Switch is really useful because it lets you take pictures of like important clues so that you can reference them without having to go back to the room where it is. So like once you reach the problem that requires the thing you saw, you can just pull up your camera and be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is what this is. Okay. There was one puzzle that overlaid two photos together because they were like basically two pieces of the same whole, but like it's a lot of Like there was one where you have to find a bunch of dinner plates that you have to arrange on a wall in a certain way, and the only clues were like you have to inspect the portrait of the butler that like managed the silverware, and then once you arrange them a certain way, it gave you a combination to a lock. Like it's that kind of stuff, I guess. I will say that they are all like have been pretty different so far. I haven't really seen the same idea repeated that I can remember, which is nice. And they're challenging enough, but like I haven't been stuck on anything. Like I haven't hit any walls in terms of like I just don't know what to do here.
Are they satisfying though? Like are they like I don't know, are they too easy, or like at the end of it are you like, okay, that felt good to do?
I think they have a nice balance overall. Of like, okay, there was enough bite here where I did have to think, but it wasn't this like obtuse nightmare. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Of like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I don't understand how we got to this solution. Like, I haven't had that moment yet. There are some puzzles where you're like, okay, I see where this is going pretty quick. But then the question is like, okay, I see the ending, but how do I get there? Like, what are they going to make me go through to get to this? And then the process of getting to that is usually pretty painless. Like like there aren't usually too many steps involved with solving a puzzle, which can sometimes lead to tedium in other games like this, where you're just like, okay, let's just do all 50 things to get to the obvious solution. Like they seem to keep it pretty snappy overall. So I've been satisfied so far. Like I'm usually excited to see another puzzle and get through it. Like I said, this is like a good cozy game where it's like, okay, I'm gonna put them on thinking hat for a bit, but I'm also not going to be like staring at the screen for an hour being like, I don't know what to do here.
Yeah, I mean that's always make or break for me with visual novels such as this, where it's like I usually like the story is almost like, yeah, that's a good like way to experience a story, but like the puzzles are what keep me engaged. And like or like even like conversation trees, if you're able to engage in those types of things with other characters, but like the puzzles really make or break the experience for me. And with that, it's like, all right, well, if they're too tedious, if they're poorly designed, if they're not satisfying, that's usually like my one-way trip out of a visual novel experience. So I'm glad to hear that you're having an overall good time with the puzzles in this one.
Yeah, and this game also adds quality of life stuff. Like in the beginning of the game, they ask you like, hey, do you want to turn on a hint system where at any time, if you hit the minus button, you can bring up a hint that kind of nudges you towards what you should be doing next, or maybe this is where you might want to go to solve the problem that you're on, so you can make the experience easier in that way. There's also even I turned this off, but you can have a navigation ring around Ashley where it's always pointing you towards the objective that you should be heading towards.
Oh wow.
So there's some assist options for those that are just kind of like maybe a little more gun shy about like, oh, I don't want to have to think too much, basically. I just want to absorb the story. So like the game takes care of you in that way. The map regularly updates with points of interest. It tells you which doors are locked and which aren't. It tells you, what important things you found in that room, so you can remember like, okay, this room had this. I did this here. Okay. So that's nice. So I think the game does a good job of just shaving off any rough edges that could appear or maybe did appear in the original version, it's pretty nice.
Well, that's good to hear. I do want to check this out eventually. I've just been playing another game for review, so you know how that goes, where it's a very long game, so I am just spending all day and night playing that. But I will check out Another Code Recollection. It's out now, as you're listening to this, on Switch. And if you want to see it in action, you can go check out an episode of New Gameplay today on the Game Informer YouTube channel. I know we have not reviewed it, Marcus. You gave your impressions very admirably on this show, but we don't have a scored review. But it does currently have a 72 on Metacritic. So I'm looking at the scores, and they range from like a 50 to a 90. And then like a 70 seems to be like the most, like the median score almost. But yeah, 72 on Metacritic. So opinions all over the place on this release. But
interesting.
We are going to take our final break of this episode, and when we get back, we'll be doing an eShop Gem of the Week, and everybody votes. We will be right back. We are back, and we are going to close out this show with the eShop Gem of the Week. Last week, I was going to do this one, but then we ended up going a little bit longer than I expected, so I decided to save it for this week. So I'll handle this one. This is a game that I bought on sale a while back, and I finally fired it up, and I have been having a really good time with it. It is called Dicey Dungeons. Marcus, do you know anything about this game?
Haven't played it, but I actually have a buddy who's recommended it to me for like years, because I think it was on Xbox Game Pass. It might still be, actually, but haven't played it.
So basically, you are playing through these dungeons, and they're all like roguelike design and everything, and as you start off, you have like minimal powers, and you go through these dungeons and these encounters, and like each floor of the dungeon is almost like set up like a hub world, almost like Mario, where it's like, all right, you can go left and there'll be a treasure chest there, but like you also might have to fight through this extra battle to get to that treasure chest. So the encounters, and there's shops, and there's treasure chests and everything that you can loot, and then there's an exit, and that'll take you down to the next floor of the dungeon, and the goal is obviously to get to the bottom of it. But each time, like, you have an inventory essentially, and then you have like your loadout, and your loadout is almost like Resident Evil style inventory management, where it's like, okay, well, this spell takes up 2 slots and this one takes up 1, and like this one is a huge one, so it takes up a lot more, and you have a set number of squares that you can position these, and each one does like a different effect. So I have one that's like a sword attack, and then I have one that is a like a battle axe, and the battle axe will do double damage, but it has to be a certain number, and these numbers, like the amount of damage you do, is determined basically by actual rolls of the dice. So like as you start off, I think you only have 1 or 2 dice, and you roll them, and it's like, all right, I got a 2 and a 4. All right, well, I could cast my fire spell, but that only can be done with like odd numbers. So there's also an option that you can have in your loadout where you can re-roll certain dice. So, all right, well, I got a 2 and a 4. This enemy is susceptible to fire damage. I need to get an odd number, so you can re-roll the 2, and then that will make it so that, okay, well, I got a 5 this time. All right, well, I could do the battle axe, but I need to be 5 or below, or the fire, which needs to be odd. So which one do I want to do? And you have to kind of do the calculus in your head of like, all right, well, this one will do more damage to this enemy because they're susceptible to fire. So I'll use my 5 roll that I got there. There's also other ones that are like, they require you to have lower numbers, and it's a very fun risk reward to like being like, all right, which one do I want to re-roll? And then as you progress, you get more dice that you can roll, and then like other enemies also, when you fight enemies, they also are rolling dice and applying it, and the status ailments are really just affecting their dice or affecting your dice. So there's one that's like, it makes it so your dice roll 1 less than you normally would roll, or there's one that makes it so that, like burn, for example, like they'll cast burn on you, and it'll make it so that like in order to access one of your dice, depending on how many burns, so if you have 3 dice and they cast 2 spells of burn on you, or status ailments of burn, that'll affect 2 of your dice. So in order to use those dice this turn, so you can just choose to ignore them, or you can just like kind of bite the bullet and select that die, and it'll inflict HP damage to you just to access that die. So it's like the kind of constant like balancing of like, all right, well, do I want to re-roll? Do I want to use this for this thing? Because, you know, you could roll a 4 and be like, oh, well, I want to do more damage, so let me roll again. But you might get a 3 at that point, right? Like it might be a lower roll, and you only have a set number of re-rolls per turn, and it's turn-based combat. And then at the end of completing the dungeon, you can spin the wheel, and it'll carry over certain things based on what you land on. And I think there's like something like 30 dungeons that you have to complete, so it's pretty extensive in terms of like the content. And then there's also 2 expansions as well that are seemingly free included with the game.
Oh, nice.
So it's like there's one that's like a Halloween themed Dicey Dungeons, and then there's another one that is like the Reunion, I think it's called, where it's like, I don't know, it's, I guess, the characters that you encounter in the first one, in like the base game. Excuse me. But yeah, it came out on Switch in 2020. It's also on pretty much every other platform, but it's $15, so it's not that big of an investment, and I've been having a blast with it. Like, I think that it would probably be one of my favorite games of 2020 if I played it in 2020. But yeah.
We can go back and update the list if you want.
Yeah, let's go back and do that. I'll get right on that. Updating that list, because it's very important that people go back and read my favorite games of 2020. But no, it's a very fun game. Highly recommend it. And it also it seems to be on sale pretty regularly. I think just 2 weeks ago it was down to like $5. So if you don't want to drop the $15, just wait for a sale. Add it to your wish list. That's always the hot tip for these eShop gems, is like add it to your wish list, and then Nintendo will literally email you to tell you when your games are on sale. That is like the best thing that I have started doing. It's also the worst thing, because I've spent a lot more money than I probably want to.
Yeah,
but
I like the way they word their emails. They're like, good news about a game on your wish list. And they're like, well, oh, what's the good news? And they're like, oh, it's on sale. That's always the good news. Why not just say it's on sale? I was like, now if you say like, we're giving it to you for free, that's the great news.
That would be amazing news.
Yeah, like, hey, you just own this now. Surprise.
They should do that more often. Like, Merry Christmas. Yeah, they should just give us stuff for free. Come on.
Yeah.
We deserve it. You see the hellscape that we exist in on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, y'all long have to play that broken Pokemon game? Y'all should compensate me for that.
Marcus, we are going to close out this episode with the return of Everybody Votes. Have you ever been on an episode for Everybody Votes? I think you might have been on the inaugural episode, if I recall.
Do I? I don't remember what it is. Remind me.
So basically, I put out a poll on the platform formerly known as Twitter, asking people questions about a topic, and then we weigh in ourselves here.
Okay.
So the topic this time, Marcus, is which Zelda game would you most like to see a modern remake of?
Ooh.
So the options I gave people: Ocarina of Time, Oracle of Ages / Seasons, the original Legend of Zelda from NES, or Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link.
Oh, I know my answer.
Go for it.
It's Zelda 2.
Really?
That's the one I've been always wanting secretly, and would be the most interesting, just because that game is so... I mean, depending on how much patience you have, it is so incomprehensible sometimes. It's just a hard game. Like, I've tried every like several years, I will take another stab at Zelda 2, and then I tap out. And I would love to see them go back to that, because it's the only one that's like a side-scrolling action game. So I would love to see, like, do they still make it a side-scroller, or do they like completely remake it of like it's a third-person action game of like kind of what they did with like Hyrule Warriors, or at least what, you know, Omega Force did. Like, I'm not saying make it a Musou game, but like, you know, we've seen a third-person action Zelda game before. And like, I would love to see them, like, what puzzles they would rework, or which ones they would keep the same. Would they keep the weirdness of like I Am Error and all that stuff? And also just because it's such a weird point in Zelda's history of like, this was before the conventions had been established, which is why they completely threw out what they did with the first game.
Yeah.
When they did Zelda 2, and then immediately ran back to what they did, because oh, okay, maybe this is like, maybe people really like what we did with that first game more than what we did here. And also it'd be cool to see like Dark Link, you know, redone, like
Dark Link Duck
fight. Yes, exactly. See, I think out of like easily Zelda 2 is the most interesting, because they already remade Ocarina with the 3DS one, and you could argue that Breath of the Wild is basically Zelda 1 as a remake, you know? The Oracle games would be cool, but like, yeah, Zelda 2, I think, pretty handedly for me.
So thinking of it from a selfish perspective, and just like wanting to play a better version of one of my favorite games of all time, my pick would be Ocarina of Time. However, from an objective standpoint of like what game most needs a remake, I'm with you, Zelda 2. Because that game, and that's part of what they were trying to do with Ocarina of Time, was they were making Zelda 2 style stuff. Like they were trying to remake Zelda 2 essentially in 3D.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, because I mean, that is a third-person action game.
But yeah, so I think Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link would be something that would do the most for the franchise, right? Like in terms of like making the most progress on a game, right? Because like Ocarina of Time, if you go back and play it, there are definitely like a lot of growing pains associated with that, like being that it was one of the trailblazers of 3D action games.
Yeah.
but it's still very playable. It's still a very good game.
Yeah,
Zelda 2 is rough to go back to today.
Yeah, I would almost wonder, like, because of how hard Zelda is, and Nintendo would never do this probably, but like, what if they turn Zelda 2 in like a Souls-like kind of thing? Of like,
don't you dare.
Like, lean into the difficulty aspect of like, just make, I'm not saying you have to have the same like progression, but like, just make it really hard.
I mean, the death screen in Zelda 2 feels like a Souls game, right? Where it's like, instead of just saying you died, it was like, what is it? The Return of Ganon?
Oh, is that what
yeah, like if you die, like
that's
Ganon's only appearance in Zelda 2 is you die.
It's like a silhouette, right?
Yeah, and it's like an orange screen, I think, and
right.
it just like it's like Return of Ganon, because like that's the whole point, is like you're trying to prevent his followers from resurrecting him after his defeat in Zelda 1.
Yeah, man, I would. And you know what's also, it would be interesting Nintendo acknowledge it, because I feel like it's interesting to me. It's always been fascinating that Zelda 2 and at least the US version of Mario 2 are the two like odd ducks in their respective franchises that Nintendo only kind of acknowledges every now and then. And it's like, I would love to see both of those games get like modern remakes or at least spiritual successors, but you're like, they probably never will, right? Like Zelda 2's, they are like, yeah, we did that. We tried that once and then we said never again. So,
it's so interesting to me that like certain characters from Mario 2 have carried over, but everything else has been completely retconned, right? Or not retconned, but like ignored. Like Shy Guys, they're suddenly like a part of the Mario mythos.
Yeah, it's like Shy Guy and Birdo are kind of the only things they kept.
Birdo and the Ninjas, the little like little star guys.
But it's like, I mean, I was always bugged that they never put Mario 2 stuff in Mario Maker. I'm
yeah.
Like, just give us like, put like, you know how cool it would be to make a level and you could put Phanto in there and just have Phanto.
No, it wouldn't be cool. That guy sucks. I hate Phanto.
Exactly. I would love to just ruin people's lives with just putting Phanto all over the place.
They well, I mean, there's speculation that if Mario Maker 2 did better, they were going to add that as another style. But instead, what they did was they added the mushroom post-launch that turned you into like the Mario 2 sprite.
See, honestly, they should have done that in reverse of like, if that game led with, hey, we put Mario 2 stuff in here, I bet it would have done better, because it would have been enough of a difference from the first game. You know what I mean? Like, hey,
yeah.
And plus people were begging. If they just said at launch, like, yeah, we got Mario 2 stuff from the beginning, I bet there would have been more excitement around it.
Maybe, but also that's a lot more work. So I think that, I mean, honestly, I think that's what happened with that. But so the results of this poll, which Zelda game would you most like to see a modern remake of? What do you think won?
Probably Ocarina, because everybody loves Ocarina.
You are correct. 53% of the vote, Ocarina of Time, runaway winner.
So do we not acknowledge that the 3DS remake did that? Does no one remember that?
You have to think about it. That's almost a decade and a half old now.
I mean, yeah, but like, didn't it do a really good job of remaking that game? I never played it, but I remember hearing from people like, oh yeah, they pretty much nailed it, right?
Yeah, they did, but at the same time, like, it's not available on modern platforms.
I mean, true.
3DS has been dead for how many years? 7 years?
In my head, that would seem like the least exciting one, because it's like, oh, they did that. They did it. You can go play that right now.
But that was more of a reskinning of the entire game, and then they massaged certain parts of it, like the water temple and like the items and everything, that like certain items are easier to switch on and off, like the boots. They were made items instead of like gear, so you didn't have to go into the pause screen every single time. You could just hit a button to turn it on and off. Right. I would say that would veer closer to a remaster than a remake, whereas like this is like a full-on remake, like kind of, you know, what you would expect from a modern Zelda game, but with the story and progression and everything of the original, like what we got with Link's Awakening, right?
Right.
Like that's what we're looking at.
Though even then, Link's Awakening was, I mean, obviously it was a graphical overhaul, but a lot of, unless I'm forgetting, like, a lot of that game was pretty much 1-to-1.
Yeah, it was.
Really, like, it wasn't like this reinvention of it. It's like we made it look nicer and shaved off some rough edges, so it was more or less the same approach as the Ocarina, 3DS, I guess, remake, whatever we want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit more because the modernization. Because they also had to they could account for multiple face buttons instead of just the 2 that were on the Game Boy, which was huge quality of life improvement.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, Oracle of Ages and Seasons was 17%, number 2. Zelda 2 was number 3 at 16%, and then the original Legend of Zelda was the last entry with 14%. I also would
the secret answer is Link's Awakening. Or not Link's Awakening, I'm sorry. A Link Between Worlds.
I was just about to say that, Marcus. That is actually one that I would love to see, but I think that you could just port that over, just make it higher resolution visuals and port it over, and that you're good.
I mean, that's fine too. I just want that game on Switch.
Love that game so much.
Whatever it takes, Nintendo, just please do it.
Yes, one of the greatest Zelda games of all time, and somehow underappreciated.
Yeah, it's weird, right? Because it's not like the 3DS didn't sell like a zillion copies, so a lot of people played that game, presumably. But yeah, it does feel like somewhat forgotten somehow.
I don't know why.
I guess because Breath of the Wild was the next Zelda game after it, and it just completely overtook everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, we also got Wind Waker Twilight Princess HD around that time. I guess that was a couple years later, but yeah.
Put some respect on Link Between Worlds names, everyone.
Yes, 100%. I was actually going to put A Link to the Past in this poll, but then I was like, oh wait, no, I need to include Oracle of Ages and Seasons. That needs a remake before Link to the Past. But
yeah.
Marcus, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thank you so much to everyone for listening. Do me a favor if you haven't already, throw All Things Nintendo a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button. If you want to get any questions or comments in, you can get in touch with me at allthingsnintendo@GameInformer.com or message me on social media at Brian P. Shea. You can also join the Game Informer Community Discord, which is a perk for subscribing to our Twitch channel, even just for 1 month. Marcus, tell everyone where they can find you online.
You can find me on Twitter at Marcus Stewart 7. I'm also on Blue Sky at the same name, though I haven't logged in months because I keep forgetting I have a Blue Sky. So it's probably very boring to follow me there.
That is our show for this week. Thank you again so much for listening. Take care. We'll see you next time.